Elliot Matthews was a man who prided himself on his loyalty, his work ethic, and his quiet, predictable life. He had spent years building a home with his wife, Anna. Their relationship had been, for the most part, unremarkable. The sort of love that did not burn with intense passion, but instead simmered comfortably, as if they were two halves of a whole, content with their simple life. They lived in a small, charming house on the outskirts of a quiet town, where everyone knew everyone else, and the rhythm of life never seemed to change. Anna was beautiful, though in a more subtle way than most would admit. She had long, dark hair, a quiet laugh that made her more endearing, and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife, devoted, kind, and loving. But Elliot had always sensed something was just a little off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he wondered sometimes if he truly knew his wife as well as he thought. One late autumn evening, Elliot came home from work a little earlier than usual. He had been looking forward to spending some quiet time with Anna, perhaps enjoying a glass of wine and discussing their plans for the coming winter. But when he opened the front door, a feeling of unease washed over him. The house was too quiet. He called out for Anna, but there was no response. That he walked through the living room, glancing around at the familiar surroundings, until his eyes fell on something that didn't belong. On the coffee table was a small piece of paper, folded neatly in half. It was an envelope, addressed to Anna in what he immediately recognized as a familiar handwriting, one that did not belong to him. His heart pounded as he picked it up. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but there was a sense of finality to it. Without thinking, he opened it, feeling the crinkling sound of the paper between his fingers. Inside was a letter, and as he unfolded it, he froze. The words on the page were like a slap across his face. "I can't wait to see you again. These stolen moments with you are the only thing that makes sense in my life. You know where to find me. I'm counting the days." The words were written with such tenderness, such longing, that Elliot could almost hear the voice of the man who wrote them. His stomach churned as he stood there, staring at the letter, his mind spinning with disbelief and confusion. How could Anna be having an affair? How could she betray him like this? She had always been so loving, so seemingly devoted. How had he missed the signs? Elliot didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to scream, to confront Anna immediately, but another part of him told him to wait, to gather his thoughts, to plan his next move. He couldn't let his anger cloud his judgment. No, he needed to be methodical. He needed to understand the full extent of her betrayal before he acted. Over the following days, Elliot's world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every time he saw Anna, he felt a strange detachment, as though she were a stranger. She continued as though nothing had changed, making dinner, chatting about her day, sharing small details about her work. It was as if she had no idea that the life she thought she was leading was about to come crashing down. Elliot's mind churned with questions. Who was this man? When had it started? How many times had she seen him? But above all, he couldn't help but ask, why? What had driven her to betray him? After a few days of agonizing over his options, Elliot decided to confront Anna. But not yet. Not without proof. He needed to know everything. That he began following her. It was a decision that haunted him with guilt, but he couldn't stop himself. Every evening, he would wait for Anna to leave the house, and he would follow at a safe distance. He didn't know where she was going, but his instincts told him it was not to the grocery store or to see friends. It was always the same route, through winding streets and alleys, until finally, she would disappear into a small, inconspicuous building on the edge of town. Elliot's breath caught in his throat when he realized what it was. A hotel. The kind that rented rooms by the hour. His hands trembled as he watched Anna enter the building, her face hidden behind sunglasses, as though she were trying to be incognito. His stomach dropped. He knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was seeing someone else. That night, as Anna returned home, Elliot was silent. He could hear the sound of her footsteps, the rustle of her coat as she hung it on the rack, the click of her shoes against the wooden floor. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he went to the study, where he had placed the letter. When Anna entered the room, he was sitting there, holding the envelope. "Elliot," she asked, her voice tentative. "Is everything all right?" He didn't answer her immediately. He simply handed her the letter. She took it, her face growing pale as she read the words that had torn his world apart. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she set the letter down on the table and sat down across from him. "Elliot, I can explain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Explain," he repeated, his voice rising. "How could you explain this? How long has it been going on, Anna? How many times have you been with him?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she simply stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "I never wanted to hurt you," she finally said, her voice shaky. I felt so alone. There were things missing in our relationship, things I didn't know how to tell you." "Alone?" Elliot's voice was thick with emotion. "You were never alone. I was always here, Anna. You chose him. You chose to betray me." She reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered over his, but he pulled it away. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "But I'm sorry. I never wanted to lose you." The apology didn't reach him. It was empty, hollow. The love he had once felt for her had turned to bitterness, to a cold rage that he didn't know how to control. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You've lost me," he said, his voice cold. "You've lost me forever." Elliot's decision was not one made in the heat of the moment, but one he had thought about long and hard. He could have left her. He could have walked away, but something inside of him refused to let her go without consequence. If she had broken their vows, he would break hers. For the following weeks, Elliot carried out his plan. He began to study the man who had stolen his wife's heart, a man named Marcus Green. He was a successful businessman, well known in their town, charismatic and charming. Elliot's research revealed that Marcus had a history of affairs, a man who loved the thrill of seduction but had no real loyalty to anyone. Elliot used his position at the company where he worked to gather information on Marcus. He learned of his schedule, his habits, even where he liked to frequent on the weekends. With this knowledge, Elliot began to quietly sabotage Marcus's life, feeding him false information, making subtle changes to his schedule, and planting seeds of doubt in his personal and professional relationships. The more Elliot watched Marcus struggle, the more he felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to ruin him, but it was enough to make him question everything. Marcus was no longer the confident, self-assured man who had so easily won Anna's heart. Instead, he was a man on the edge, looking over his shoulder, unsure of what was happening to his carefully constructed world. And in the end, when Anna finally came to him, pleading for forgiveness, Elliot didn't give it. He didn't need to. His revenge was complete. The life he had once shared with her was gone, and he was free. But more than that, he had learned something about himself. He didn't need to be the victim. He didn't need to forgive. He was the one who had the power now, and as for Anna, she would have to live with the consequences of her betrayal for the rest of her life.